I don't want this to be team red, team blue, but I do want this to be an interesting conversation about the political upside of management in a crisis. We all know what the pitfalls are. We all know what the problems are. And let's see whether we can surprise people with our corners that we go to about who's doing an okay job here and otherwise. Now, an academic said this in the Brisbane Times about Palaszczuk and Palaszczuk's leadership, that it was a good move to suspend Parliament until October. Queensland's a state whose electors love strong leadership, and it's part of our political culture. Our political culture also says we don't have a long time for airs and graces of niceties of the Westminster parliamentary democracy. Now, I'm interested in this because there are some parliaments, and the federal parliament's been shut down for multiple months, New South Wales as well, where, James, even though we are in the crisis that we are in, I can also see people say, well, hang on, you expect the cops to go to work, but the backbenchers don't have to? So is the definition of what works and what people like in leadership different depending on where they live, or is it different depending on where they sit on the political spectrum, or are there some fundamental rules in a crisis that always work?
That's a good question. I don't really know. I mean, I don't think Parliament these days really dictates much of the national conversation the way it used to in years gone by. I don't, it was very distressing to me when I stopped being the Canberra correspondent to realise how little notice people had been taking of what I was doing. And
now every time I blew into town and people are all fighting, mate, no one cares, no one, that bogan Murray
true.
Doesn't know what's going on.
And state parliament,
even worse.
Doubly so.
Yeah.
But I don't think that just because Parliament isn't sitting doesn't mean MPs aren't working. They'd be working really hard at the moment because their doors would be being knocked down by constituents who had problems that they needed solved. This is the time when that they are at work. I mean, at other times, some of those state upper house MPs, well, I think it's a pretty easy life. But at the moment, I would like to assume that they're all working. As to the question of whether or not it's going to be what works as a leadership, well, I think the answer to that we won't know until this is all over, and we unfortunately look at the butcher's bill. And if some countries have managed to get through this losing a hatful, and other countries have lost thousands and thousands, there's going to be some hard questions the people are going to have to answer.
Yeah, I mean, Nicholas, again, it all depends, I suppose, on some degree on perspective. But I always think you should always be very nervous about sitting in a country and trying to look at the attributes of another country's leader and say, oh, why aren't they more like us, right? So on the left, that's, can't we be more like Ardern? On the right, why can't we be more like Trump? But the truth is we don't live with the daily saturation coverage that living in a country where that person is the leader is the leader. Instead, we only see certain pockets, which means we don't get the sort of burnout factor. So we're seeing all different types of leadership happening in Australia here. So again, I don't want to be as specific about a person, but what works in a crisis?
Well, look, you're certainly true. It's certainly right when you say that politics of particular countries always looks a bit better from a distance. And when you get there, and I found this when I travelled myself in politics, you get to a particular country and go, gee, you guys seem to be doing so well. And they're saying, are you kidding? Every day we're getting ground into dust here. And so when you get closer to a country's politics by actually living there, you realise most countries are just trying to muddle forward like the rest of us, and it's usually one step forward, two steps back. In terms of what people look for in a crisis, I do think they like strong leadership. In terms of the analysis of the Queensland situation, the deferral of Parliament, possibly until after the election, look, I think that will definitely suit Annastacia Palaszczuk because the Parliament still does provide the best platform for opposition to scrutinise government and to catch them out on mistakes they're making. And when they're denied that platform, it denies them the ability to lay some blows on the government. Whether the public will care deeply about that, I'm not so sure. I don't think people will be deeply worried about the fact that the Queensland Parliament is not sitting. I think they accept the fact that the situation is pretty terrible at the moment, and so there's a legitimate reason for them to not be sitting. What's my own personal view? I think they should be embracing online parliament. I think they should be able to have meetings online and have debates online, and I think government should continue to be scrutinised even when there is a crisis on.
They do. It's called Twitter. What do you think? What do you think, Bronwyn? Look, I mean, again, we can make it very specifically about the cancelling of Parliament, and I think that what works in a crisis. You know, again, you remember that great speech from World War II? Oh, remember that amazing thing from after that disaster?
No.
But the truth is, leadership in a crisis is many decisions made every day.
Yes, it is, and shutting down Parliament is not one of them. That's what socialists do. That's what Hitler did. That's what Lenin did.
That's what Scott Morrison's done all the way out to October.
The very fabric that. Scott Morrison has not shut down the Parliament at all. He's been answering questions in question time from Albanese, as even you could have seen, Nicholas. So the point is, you do not shut down Parliament, and it is cynicism of the worst kind for Annastacia Palaszczuk to say that no Parliament till I get re-elected. That's just an appalling thing for her to do. She can have a by-election and force everyone to turn out to the by-election and the council elections, but oh dear me, the members of Parliament can't get together to have a debate. Yes, they can. So we can't give in to these things. Leadership is strong. It's interesting that in the United States, Donald Trump's regard has never been higher because he's actually taking strong leadership and he's speaking out against what is seen to be has come to be seen as listening to committees of people who are advising and taking a strong stand. So I think it is very important that people have great confidence in the leader when the leader speaks. And if I can just go back to that appointment that Scott Morrison has made of this commissioner, if he could come out and show leadership and say, for instance, these are the areas of business which could take over manufacturing and lessen our dependence on China, and we could become more self-sufficient and start to look at those areas, he would be doing something that is very good and would be showing leadership. And
Bronwyn,
if Scott Morrison has given him that power to do that, that is strong leadership. But I
Bronwyn,
honestly do not understand how we can...
All right, make it quick, Nick, because I've got to wrap it up.
Look, I'm just, with the greatest respect, Bronwyn, you are entitled to your own opinions, of which you have many, but you are not entitled to your own facts. Scott Morrison has closed the Parliament for 6 months. Federal Parliament will not sit again until August, okay? So just like Queensland, the Parliament has been extended.
I think you might find that was the sitting date. The Parliament never sits during the winter period. What has been cancelled is the budget, which is the May session. The Parliament does not sit through the winter, and it does resume later. So if you take a look at it, it's not an unusual thing, but it's got a time to come back, and it's not just before an election.
All right.
You cannot make your wishes fit what are not the facts, Nick.